And we are almost there. We will actually be a couple of minutes early, but I don't think anyone will mind. And I think we're there. We will actually be a couple of minutes early, but I don't think anyone will mind. All right. Good morning. I hope everyone can hear us, and I think we're all set today with no more technical difficulties. Welcome, Mary Alice Monroe, to the Low Country Book Club. We're so delighted to have you today to discuss your new books. Congratulations on making the New York Times bestseller list and all the best books and most anticipated.
It's been a lot.
Yes, this book certainly had the buzz going early, and with good reason. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So,
Oh, thank you so much, Susan.
oh, it was a wonderful book, and a beach book. You know, it dealt with some deep things, but it was truly a beach book, and escapism and everything your books are, but it had hit all the points you always hit. So it was a great.
And the goal is always to be inspiring. I mean, every book I write, I try to think, okay, this has to be an inspiring book.
Well,
And I hope it was. Oops.
It inspired me.
I'm just going to bend over. I got disconnected.
Oh dear.
We don't want any technical difficulties today. There we go.
Please, no technical difficulties today.
I
Okay.
think we're good.
Are we all
Yep,
set?
we're good.
All right. Good.
Yes.
All right. So, was it a difficult decision for you to set a book during the pandemic, or is that something you just knew that you had to do? Talk to us about the why of this particular book.
Wow. It's, I've been talking and thinking about it a lot since the book has come out, because there was the question, do you want to read a book about setting in the pandemic? That was a question that was, I think, more intense when I began writing it than it is now. It was in February that I was just returning home from South America, and I had my niece taking care of my house and all my animals, like we always do. And I did get COVID, but I don't think anyone knew what it was called when I had it. And so come March, when I moved in to my mountain house where I am right now, I got the shelter in place order. So think back, everybody who's listening, where were you April 8, 9, 10? That's when we all got shelter in place. And I learned that phrase, shelter in place, is a wartime phrase. To shelter in place means do not evacuate, stay where you are until you get the all clear. And I think that's really important to keep in mind, that this was a wartime mentality for the country. We were told to be careful for our lives, right? People died during this time. So there was a lot of fear, but there's also a time of a lot of heightened emotions, and relationships are tested, and a lot of love. People are living day to day. So there I am up in the mountain house, and I realized I was not going to be flying out to do research on any species. And I looked and I walked, and I realized that I found it so interesting what was in my own backyard. I was in the mountains, but anywhere, either the beach or in Kentucky or wherever y'all live, your own backyard holds a wonder of animals and insects and birds, that the more we know, the more akin we come to them. My niece just today, for example, killed a spider. And I said, well, before you do that, I mean, it was like a big old one, find out what it is, right? Because some of those big old spiders are your friends because they eat insects. And so it's really it's not scary if you know what is in your own backyard. So that was the first thing that intrigued me. And I was talking to Carl Safina, who's a wonderful naturalist, and we were both interested in this. The second thing that occurred to me was, because this was an epic time in our history, this pandemic, we're going to look back in 20 years at this year, Same way people ask, where were you when JFK was shot? Where were you when the Twin Towers fell? You know, where were you in the years 2020? How did you spend your time? And we will know because we will remember. It's that important. It's epic. So I thought I write about families, I write about relationships. Why don't I put my power of observation the same way I would look at a dolphin at the human species? So I decided this is a cool thing. This is an opportunity. One of the rules that I've lived by ever since a near-death experience in the 80s is that what sometimes looks like an obstacle becomes an opportunity, a life-changing event. I was put to bed with my pregnancy, my third pregnancy. I was teaching at the university, and my husband said, "You always wanted to write a book. Here's a piece of paper and a pencil. Write a book." Changed my life. It was an opportunity. What I thought was poor me became Yahoo. I'm an author. I have a chance. So I had that was my feeling at the time.
And that really worked
So
well.
well, I know, and a lot of people, like I won't give names, said, no one's going to want to read about the pandemic. And I said, it's not about the pandemic. It's like I'm not writing about if you're writing historical in World War II, you're not writing about the strategies of the fight. You're writing about the people who are living in the times.
Exactly.
And so that's how I looked at it. This is a setting. And I thought, what family would be better than the Rutledge family from the beach house? Because I've written this family for 20 years. My fans know this family. So I'm going to use this family as a tool. And that's how it all came together.
And that's perfect because that's a family that we can follow, that we know, that we
Yeah,
want to see how they coped with it, sort of see if that is like how we coped with it, and if there are echoes in there. And
exactly.
course, COVID is part of the setting, and the pandemic drives some of the plot, but the story isn't about COVID. It's about family dynamics and Linnea's romantic relationships, and COVID
Yeah.
sort of crashed into all our lives. If there hadn't been a pandemic, though, I have to ask you, how would the story have been different? Did you already have another way of telling a similar story in mind? Where Linnea comes to terms with the men in her life and some of the other things happen, but
Right.
before COVID? Did you have the story in your head in another version?
Wow. You're the only one who's asked me that question. The truth is, I knew that if I wrote another beach house book, because I'm already researching another species, um, but I usually research for 2 or 3 years before a story comes to me. But I knew that I wanted to do another beach house book for the next generation. And that was my working title, The Beach House, The Next Generation. I don't have a story though. I only have an idea and then I do the research. So probably I would have looked at what was going on my own beach, with turtle nests or with maybe I find it very interesting that the red knots that are a migrating bird that loves to land in the spring and they eat the eggs of the horseshoe crabs. That's so interesting. And I've thought, now that would have been something I could have delved into, you see? So I don't have a story. So when that hit, I would have written this book based on. So no, it would not have been the same story. For sure, there would not have been a love triangle. That happened because when I left the last book, and I always say that each book can be read as a standalone. But if you read the series, it does move forward. And in the last book, Linnea had said goodbye to Gordon and he went back to England. And I set it up that I'm sorry, not John was gone. He broke her heart. Done. And David, Kara's husband, I had set it up, communicated, traveled back and forth from London a lot. So I kind of thought, wow, this is perfect. I have it set up for the pandemic. Go, girl, go. It's like all roads lead to the pandemic. So I had Cooper fly in from Oxford to come home. And I had Gordon wanting to come in. And this was a big deal. People trying to get into the country before the doors closed. You remember the airports were shutting down. And then David, like the husband, I had, okay, he comes home and someone's going to get COVID. Someone had to get sick. And so I looked at, I was Susan, I was living this while I wrote it. I didn't get to plan or say, I think I'll use this and this and then work out. I wrote what I was living, real time. Never did it before, never will do it again. But it brought an immediacy to the book, and this book was extraordinarily personal because when I experienced things myself, my characters got the fallout. They
Right.
experienced it. So I just brought it, and I think that's what made it work, was that it was heartfelt and true, and
Sort of like a
I,
almost.
I like a
Like a journal almost of what you were.
sort of, but give you an example. And I didn't realize this until I was talking about it. Started my book tour, and I went, "Oh, Mary Alice, look at what you did." Um, when I was in this house, I told you in March, my niece was with me. She's 30 years old, and she was in the service industry and didn't have a job, and everything was closing down. Probably a lot of people listening know people who, especially in restaurants, they closed, or people lost jobs or worked remotely. So I told my niece, "You stay here. Stay here. I'll take care of you. Don't worry about it." And then my sister, who is a psychotherapist in Chicago, living in a condo, and Chicago was closing down, said, "Get out of the city. Come to the mountains and live with me just for the summer." We thought, by the summer it would be over, right?
Right.
That's what we thought. And then my sister in LA let go, furloughed. I said, "Get out of LA. They're having a hard time." And they all took the risk to drive. And we ended up, four of us, we called it the Women of Windover. My house is Windover. I didn't realize it until I was talking about the book, that in the novel, at the opening of the book, Linnea, the young 26-year-old, has the dream job at the aquarium, and she's furloughed, which a lot of people were. And the first scene, she calls her Aunt Kara, and everyone who knows the series, and if you don't, Kara is her aunt, but also her mentor. And this little beach house began 2 generations before, when Lovey, the quintessential Southern woman, it was her sanctuary, and she was a turtle lady. And when Kara came home in book 1, The Beach House, she was 40 years old. And the mother said, "Stay here. This is now your sanctuary." When she died, she gave her the beach house. So Kara, over the next 20 years, evolved. Now she's a 60-year-old, near 60 woman who is able to be the mentor, take over the old crone role, which is the wise woman. That's one of the perks of getting old, is you get to be the wise woman. So Kara's the wise woman. She is called over, and she's renting the house to Linnea. So Linnea tells her, "I've been furloughed." And Kara says, "You know what? This house, the legacy of this little beach house, is women helping women. We lend a hand to other women because women are always paying. They always do." And she said, "This is your legacy now. You don't have to pay rent. Just, this is what we Rutledge women do." So that is taken to heart by Linnea in the novel. And throughout the next beginning chapter, she takes in another woman friend from the aquarium. She takes in her brother, who comes home from England and doesn't want to live with mom and dad. God help him. "Please, sis, take me in." And then her boyfriend from England wants to come. And of course, he wants to come to be with her. So I realized, Susan, I was writing my own life. I brought people in. My legacy of Windover was, in fact, the legacy of the beach house. So that's the kind of thing, as I experienced it, I put into the book.
It's amazing. And it is a journal because so many people were having similar experiences. If they were congregating and bringing people into their home, or if they were creating their pods with neighboring families or whatever, so many people were doing that. So
And
it's
that's it, the pods. I mean,
right.
those were trusted groups. The other thing that really worked out was, the pod included multi-generations. So I observed, I really did observe it like I would a pod of dolphins. You know, you had the older generation, which would be Kara and her friend Emmy, who lives next door. And with her lives an older woman, Flo, who is Alzheimer's. And it's declaring itself in this book. And you see the older generation worried for their health. Were we going to die? And they were scared. The younger generation, which is all those youngins in the beach house, or as her mother called it, the brothel. That was a funny scene.
We will get to that in a moment. Yes.
Okay. They were they had no dates. That's why they were COVID couples. They were hooking up within their pod.
Right, right,
It
right.
was interesting. Excuse me.
So your last book, and this sort of segues into that, on Ocean Boulevard, featured Lynn, bless you, but also had Mary
Yes.
Harris story. So they sort of shared the spotlight, so to speak. But in this book, there seemed to be that shifting of focus to the ocean. And this felt to me like Linnea's book, and you alluded to that a moment ago, and the younger generation and all that. Is there any more of your perspective on that sort of changing of the guard that you would like to share? Or
Oh, yes, indeed. The reason I wanted to go to the next generation is twofold. One is I love the young stories. The love stories are great. I have multi-generational love stories, but in fact, poor Emmy, it's her turn. Good Lord, she's been waiting for 20 years since her divorce. I ought to give that woman a good love story, don't you think?
yes, could you get on
And
that?
at the end of this book, I opened the door, didn't I? A little bit, open the door.
You did.
I have an idea for Emmy, but the young people there's a lot of new decisions to make. I also like the multi-generational and family sagas, and this has become a family saga. But the third reason is this is the new generation who's going to take over the care of the turtles, care of the beaches. They're the stewards of today, not even tomorrow. We need to engage this young generation of readers to what's going on. And I always wrote these novels for 20 years to bring my world to my readers in an authentic way, in a world that I live in, so they'll feel my passion. That they don't have to come to the Isle of Palms because they've been there in my books. Because it's more than story, it's the setting. I am a turtle lady. I do work with rehabilitation of the turtles and the birds, and it's what I feel and do. So it's authentic. And I feel that if my readers feel my passion and the emotion through characters, then that emotion, it's what going to hook them to care. And if I always say my mantra is if you care, you take care. And it's just an awareness that we share this beautiful place. And the more that I've worked with animals now, wildlife, for over 30 years. And I have to say, Susan, that not only does it enrich my life, but it gives me a broader perspective and strength. It's a connection to God power. And when you connect with nature and the sunset, sunrises, mountains, anything, that God power fills you up and gives you balance to be a better person with all your relationships. You know, everyone is like this in our lives. We're all up and down, but this is the God power, and that's nature. And I think if my readers sense that, they're not going to let go of it.
Very well said. Okay, so to the very proper Southern mother, Julia, I laughed,
I know where you're going.
laughed out loud. Where this very proper Southern mother naturally walks in while both her children are clearly entertaining. I imagine that.
Well, they're in, shall we say, their pajamas, right? And they're like ducking, and yeah. And so that was so funny. Here's the truth. I knew this next generation, and I had written a draft, and I called my daughter Greta, who's cool. She's the one who does the surfing and the kite surfing. So whenever I write about in this book, there's a lot of surfing in this book because that's what kids do on Isle of Palms, and kite surfing. And my daughter's a world-class kite surfer. So for the Low Country series, that's Carson. Anyway, I said, Greta, I need your help again. So here's my problem, I told her. I said, I have Gordon, wanting to come from England, and John, her old boyfriend, in quarantine next door. So you've got this love triangle. She's trying to decide, what do I do? Can I love two men at one time? And I said, so how can I get Gordon in from England without him going into the beach house? Because, they're not married. And she goes, Ma, first, first of all, in the last book, on Ocean Boulevard, they're together. So he goes to England. Of course, he's expecting to stay with her. And I'm like, but my readers won't like that. Not my beach house. No, no, no. And so she made me, I had to observe. I cannot be judgmental, right? I'm observing. I don't say to the dolphin, none of that now over there. So I just I listened, and I created a realistic world for these young kids. We have a COVID couple. We have the guys on the boat. Oh my God, that fishing scene with those boys talking, hysterical. That's because my brother helped me. Again, he said, the boys don't talk like that. And he guided me what guys say on boats, which girls, you'd be surprised. And I laugh every time I read it. And in the end, I was frustrated, but I gave Julia, the mother, who is what you're referring to, all my shock and horror. And she goes over to tell Kara, oh my God, it's a brothel. And it's hysterical. And then Kara gives the good advice. We have to let them go. Kara's the crone. And I use that with the most respect and affection. In England, there's a literary device called the old crone. You see them in fairy tales. Usually there's an old witch, but it doesn't have to be. It's the wise woman. And we can all go to England, and there's a place in Glastonbury where you can become certified an old crone. That's on my bucket list, because the idea of being mature, wise, advice giving, hard won wisdom appeals to me.
I had no idea you could get a certificate for that.
I want to be certified old crone. I've got the old down. I just need the crone down.
I like that. That's interesting.
But it is a wonderful place to be as an author. It's a device I use in most of my novels. There's either through a group of friends, but whenever there's a generation, I like Lovey was the old crone at the beginning of the book. Someone who gives that wise wisdom that helps the next generation. And in truth, speaking of legacy, which is one of the themes of the book, the legacy, women helping women, passing on. What is your legacy? And that's one of the questions I brought up in the book as I questioned my own. What is my legacy going to be when I'm gone? I know my professional legacy. I feel pretty confident. In the last 20 years, I have written, since the beach house till today, a body of work where I absolutely decided that I wanted to bring the landscape into a story form that my readers would love. I could tie it up with a bow and put it on my shelf now, because I've done 20 years. I'm still going to be writing, but I feel like if I died tomorrow, my legacy is done. My personal legacy, what I leave my children and grandchildren, that continues. And how do I want to be remembered? How do you choose to be remembered? Each day we get to make that choice. What am I leaving behind? And that is the legacy of this whole pandemic. That's what I learned. And I'm sharing with my readers through this book. It's a powerful pause. The war is over. We're starting to build anew. And what step forward are you taking?
That's interesting. Very interesting. And something
Thank you.
we're all thinking about.
And that's the point of the book. This is inspiring, but we went through this together. And we get, I love the power of our choice.
Right. And that sort of mantra was throughout the book, we're in this together. And so that was sort of reflected, and I really, that was meaningful, I think, to everyone. But I love the scenes where the members of the pod were gathering outdoors in Emmy's garden, then later the 4th of July party. So much fun. Was it hard to balance creating these lovely group events where everyone observed social distancing, but still convey the essence of the joy of being together? How did you balance the mechanics of living in a pandemic with creating warm and happy moments like these for a group? Because that had to be
I
tough to do on the page.
actually, I think it actually made it easier because this was a group, they decided at the when they were forming this pod, like all of us did, who do we trust
Mhm.
to come into this group? And they would occasionally add, like when Pandora came from England, they included her with a joint decision. No one could just pop in. It was always a group. And so you had the three houses, basically. You had Beach House, Kara's new house on Ocean Boulevard across the street, and right smack next door is Emmy and Flo, with John's mother. So you have this pod created, and that was all I needed. It if it had been non-pandemic time, it would have been like my house in the mountains. My sisters could not have stayed for the summer. You know how my son and my daughter lived in my beach house, and my son-in-law said, "Best summer ever." He's like 40 years old. He said, "I got to stay home with my kids all summer and work remotely on the beach." So there were opportunities, and what I loved is that I watched my daughters through Zoom because they were in my house in Isle of Palms, trying to have their kids go to school with a laptop.
Mhm.
And all the moms were substitute teachers. That was hard.
Yeah.
It was a lot of hissy fits from kids. Really, like, I don't want to, you got to, a lot of parents not having to be supervised, kids not being able to play with other kids. So that's why I created the scenario with David being sick and Hope came to live with Linnea to bring in the young child. And it turns out that a lot of parents were going unplugged because they didn't want their kids unplugged, remotes, electronics, anything, because their eyes strain. So I know that when I did visit my grandchildren, we played board games. And that's why I created that lovely scene. I created a victory garden. And you'll laugh, my daughter didn't know what a victory garden was. That shows you the generations, they didn't have a war. But a lot of people created gardens. And I put Hope in the garden, the little 6-year-old girl in the garden, digging seeds. And there was a cute scene based on my PR manager, Kathy Bennett. She told me about the time her grandson was visiting her beautiful new pond that her husband built her in the backyard with the azaleas blooming. And he heard the bullfrog noise and he's like, "Khaki," which is her name, "Khaki, what's that noise?" And she said, "Well, that's our bullfrog." "You have a bullfrog?" "Yes, it's living in the pond. It's our pet bullfrog." "You have a pet bullfrog?" He goes, "Yes, and his name is Jeremiah." True story. And so she said, "Your pet bullfrog's name is Jeremiah." And she said, "And yes, there's a song made up about him." And she Googled the song on her phone. And when Jeremiah the bullfrog was playing, he's dancing. And she told me this story and it went into the book.
I remember that scene. I had
It
no
went,
idea that Kathy had her imprint on that.
well,
But
that's what I mean. And my brother told me about this going fishing with some buddies and they were talking about their lovers. And I went, "Fishing scene, 3 guys in a boat, that's going in the book." So it's just, I was hearing, living, and I have to say it was the funniest book I think I've ever written because it was the joggling board.
oh,
Y'all know what a lot of this is a Southern book club. So y'all know what a joggling board is. A lot of people out in Chicago don't. So I had created this beautiful carriage house. And in the stories, it's already been established that Miranda was an artist and she crammed the house full of stuff. So my daughter told me, the 30-year-old the surfer, of a real competition where people were creating fake surfing situations. And I just went, "Joggling board."
yeah.
Being on the joggling board, bouncing, and that created that scene. As I heard it, I created the scene. And it was easy in terms of not, it's never easy to write a book, but it was easy to find the material. What was hard, and the hardest book I've ever written, was not using my usual process, where by the time I gather all my notes and all my characterizations and everything I've worked on for years of research, I create a novel from that. With this book, I created it day by day by day. And what I thought I wanted to say at the beginning of the book was soon in the garbage, because it changed again at midsummer when it was going on, changed again in November. So by December, it was really hard won to figure out what that message was that I wanted to say to my readers, because I just don't, my method is not just to tell a story. No, but it's not my style to tell a story without something I learned that I want to share. And it's usually something a species taught me. But this was what I learned through my characters that was a takeaway post-pandemic, which should be inspiring. And that was the legacy. But the second, and probably the most true, is something I had been hearing and studying from Eckhart Tolle since the 1960s, which is to live each day to the fullest. And honestly, Susan, we've all heard that. And I just thought, oh, yeah, that's a cool concept, and what am I doing next week? So I got it after the pandemic, though,
It really,
after this year,
it really brought that home for sure.
live each day to the fullest.
So, did you intentionally, changing channels a little bit, did you intentionally use the weather to sort of set the stage for some of the emotional turbulence your characters were experiencing?
I always do. It's a device that weather should be used to exacerbate through storms or the heat, and especially at the end when that storm was so powerful. And it was unexpected. It swelled up, and isn't that what the pandemic did to us? And it brought consequences. So that I like to use weather. In the beach house, I've done a couple of hurricanes, because you don't live on a barrier island without dealing with hurricanes on a regular basis.
Indeed. So, is this the last visit we get with the Rutledge clan?
Uh,
There be more books in the Beach House series.
there will be. I know that I'm blessed to have a following for this series. A lot of people enjoy series, but I think one of the joys of this book for a lot of people was, especially in the pandemic, to see the familiarity. Oh, they're my old friends coming back.
Exactly.
They're back. And with the next generation too, Kara and Emmy, like Emmy's going to have a big turn. So that'll be that generation. I can't see it ending. I don't want to say goodbye to my best friends. And we're talking TV series, so that will encourage me to write more too.
I know a lot of people will be very happy to hear that if they didn't, because they are characters that we want to revisit again and again. We want to know what's happening with them.
Thank you. Thank you. They're good people. They're good people. Kara's a rock, I have to say. When I grow up, I want to be Kara Rutledge and live in her house.
Please.
Really.
Thing you write about, all the things that you sort of this. Well, I write about what I want, so I want that.
I know. She's got a great house. It's my dream house. My house doesn't look like that.
Well, anyway, you live in one of the most beautiful places I can imagine, and so I cannot imagine not doing what you're doing and bringing all of that to everyone else, because it's such a wonderful place. So you have not only this blockbuster summer hit, but another project on the horizon. Tell us about your upcoming middle grade book.
Oh, Susan, this has been probably one of my greatest surprises at this point in my career. I've always wanted to write a middle grade for about 10 years. And since I write picture books, it's Butterfly's Daughter. No, I'm sorry, that's my adult novel, A Butterfly Called Hope and Turtle Summer. And these are picture books that I wrote for children of all ages. As people want to know the questions, have questions and no answers. What's going on the beach? But it wasn't until I spoke to the kids in the schools that 8 to 12 group, they are so sharp and you can really tell full, rich stories. But also, these kids believe they can do anything. Hey, there's plastic in the ocean. Let's clean it up. They don't go, oh, it's too big. No, they're like, we can do it. And so I wanted to write a book for these kids. I'm also concerned about the unplugged quality of our lives. I was able to give my children summer after summer on our sheep farm where there was no TV and of course, internet wasn't there, but they were bored and unhappy and, oh, there's nothing to do. And I'm like, good, go find something to do. That kind of use your imagination. And they did. And their best summer memories are from running wild outdoors and creating forts. And we identified the plants and the birds, and we role played Indian roles. It was fun. So all that is the fodder when I was asked to write a series. I said a quick yes. And I went to my assistant colleague from last 10 years, Angela May. And I don't usually like to collaborate, but I wanted to try it. And it was her dream always to be a middle grade writer. So I said, let's just give it a whirl. And we did. And we put the story on Deweese Island, a place we both love. And it's a small sanctuary island right off Isle of Palms, accessible only by boat. No cars, no stores of any kind, no shopping, bird sanctuary. And I thought, this is where I'm going to put those kids. And we have 3 unlikely friends. They really would not have been friends if they were in Atlanta. One, the star or the hero is Jake, Army brat, dad injured from Afghanistan, mother's with him in DC. He's being sent to his grandmother's house on Deweese. He doesn't want to go. Then you have Macon, who's an African-American boy from a wealthy Atlanta family. And his mother's having a baby after having lost several. So they're in a quiet house and they're there. And then from the Beach House series is Little Lovey, the one who was born in the first book, but she's only 10 in this book. And she knows how to do everything. She can ride a boat. She's a nature lover. So these 3 kids meet up and they become best friends and they explore, they get in trouble, they unplug. And at the end, it is the best summer ever. And I have to say, I am overwhelmed by the response. The reaction to the book has been just today, Amazon picked it as one of the best books for June. And Kwame Alexander, who is the 2-time Newbery Award winner, wrote the quote, children's fiction at its finest. And I am humbled and I am tickled, that it's like my green light that I'm going to go forward. And I do have it's a series. So there will be another one, but it's called The Islanders and it's out June 15th. And I encourage, just the way I encouraged adults to read my books, to make them aware of what's wild, I encourage parents and grandparents, especially because of the grandchild role, very personal role. Get these for the kids, read it to see this world as possible. And that doesn't have to be a barrier island. It can be your own backyard, the forest preserve you live nearby. What parks are you near? Just the sense of wonder that nature brings out. I really encourage it.
Well, I can't wait to read it and to share it. And I love Deweese Island. So, just
Who doesn't love Deweese, right? I'd live there, but my husband wants a garage, so he won't. What can I say? You gotta, compromise.
exactly.
But I go a lot.
I don't blame you. So what? I know you've got something with Emmy, working in your head, and then
Yeah.
you've got more children's middle grade books working sort of on the back burner. What is next? What do we have to look forward to for our beach reading next summer? What's coming next?
I won't have an adult novel next summer.
Really?
Yeah, the book that I'm writing right now is it's just more complex and it will need a little bit more time. So I'm just going to give it, it won't be done yet. It's going to bake a little longer. So next summer, I'll have the second in the series for the Islanders. I may actually release a book that I have in my drawer that is a little, it's quite sweet, and I may release that, but I haven't decided yet. But my next big novel for adults will be in a couple of years, probably 2 years.
I'm intrigued by this drawer book.
By the drawer book? Well, it's actually a book that was published a long time ago. I have the rights back, and I've made it bigger and better, and it's fantasy. Every once in a while, I have Second Star to the Right, and if anyone hasn't read this book, I think it's my best book. It's it's about a 90-something-year-old woman who lives in a brownstone on the top floor in London, who believes she's Peter Pan's Wendy, and the young woman from America who takes the apartment downstairs. And I am a James Barrie-ophile. I really love that book. And I even have lines in the dialogue that are directly from the original. It is the most charming love story you'd ever want to read. And by the end, you're like, is she? So that's called Second Star to the Right. So that's my first fantasy. And the second one was published, but don't buy it because it's okay. It's not as good as the new one. And it's about fairies. And I love fairies. My whole life I've loved fairies. And so this is a novel about a mother-daughter situation with fairies. And that's done. I just have to release it. And then the next one is unwritten, the only last fantasy I want to write about, and that's mermaids. So in my lifetime, there will be a mermaid. I know what it is. I just have to kind of squeeze it in. They're all like planes on a runway. I just need time. So I know that on my agenda is my next adult novel and my next middle grade book. And I'll be working very hard this year to finish both of those. And I think I'll finish both. They're both started. I just have to finish. So I know without question the middle grade book will be out. And I'm guessing my adult novel will be sometime after that.
Okay.
Thank you. I've got a lot on my plate, but that's how I live my life.
You're a very busy lady. Well,
Well, let me just turn the tables. What's on the agenda for you?
well, I am working on Liz Talbot's next adventure, and it's actually going to be not not book 11 in the Liz Talbot mystery series, but it will be book one in a new series. But it will be the same characters, the same setting. Nothing is really,
Continue.
except I left the characters at sort of a turning point at the end of the last book, and so we're moving forward now. Things are slightly different, and readers will know what I'm talking about. And I'm just going to move forward, but sort of a fresh beginning for these characters. So it will be book one.
Wonderful. So we're sort of both doing the next generation, the next phase. It's exciting, isn't it? Makes you want to write.
Yes, yes, it does.
Well, I'm glad. I'm going to grab that as soon. When is that coming out?
Now,
Maybe a year.
I don't have a release date for that yet, but I
Okay, but
will let you know. Thank you.
okay, we're all eager for that too.
Sweet. Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it. I know that people are going to watch the video, at different times or whatever. They may leave questions or whatever, but we're also giving away a door prize in the group. So one of your titles, whoever will have a drawing, and that's just something we started doing with this book club. But
And can I make an announcement though? On June 16th is Wednesday for Friends in Fiction, which is y'all know I'm on. We're doing the launch of the Islanders, and it's going to be amazing because Cy Montgomery is one of the most revered nature writers about people. She writes for adults and children. S.Y. Montgomery, Cy Montgomery. And she's my special guest. Plus, Angela is going to be on the show, as well as Judy from DeWeese is going to be talking about where the real Islanders take place. So it's June 16th on Friends and Fiction is our launch, and it's going to be very special.
we'll mark our calendars.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for doing this. It's so good to see you as always.
Always great to see you, and thank you for letting me talk about my books. Thank you.
We're delighted. Thank you.
Bye.